Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always interesting to talk about the direction of 5G, of AI, and the increasing intersection with national and international security. So my involvement with these issues began in 2022 when I was involved in making policy for allocation of spectrum and therefore for larger planning around what the needs were for capacity in American 5G networks. And the more I looked, the more I thought, this is not really just about telecommunications in the traditional sense. If we were to go back 45 years in the United States and look at the monopoly era of AT&T, no one would have thought about hiring AT&T to do factory automation. That would have come from specialized industrials. No one would have thought about hiring AT&T to run a port. Their entire specialty was coast-to-coast voice communications. That's the environment in which current 5G policy derives, and it is inapposite for the present day. Because, as I discovered when I started looking, no one has ever made any money in 5G in the commercial side. There simply is no killer app at this point. Networks can't monetize. 5G mobile network operators are reluctant to move to 5G standalone in many cases because they don't see a thesis for it in terms of competitive advantage. And yet 5G is taking over the world. How did this happen? Well, it turns out that there is someone who's making money in 5G, and it's Chinese manufacturing. That is, if we look at 5G as an enabling technology for ports, for factories, for industrial automation, for medical facilities, for mining, there it really shines. And I realized, sitting down and really reading 3GPP Release 17 cover to cover and thinking about the implications, that no one will ever need 5 millisecond latency for their cell phone. That surpasses maximum human reaction time by about an order of magnitude, and average human reaction time by almost, call it a factor of 50. So there are some potential consumer applications one day when we're all using AI in the metaverse or something like that, but there's no critical path right now towards a mobile network operator in getting to 5 millisecond latency. So why is it in the spec? The answer is that the 5G spec is absolutely incredible as an industrial networking technology. And if you go to the new BYD factory, where I've not had the privilege to visit, but which is going to turn out 1 million cars a year, 5G everywhere. If you look at China's private 5G installations, particularly in industrial facilities, they have a rate of about 60x what we have in the United States. I think that's a conservative estimate, but that's what I can prove. So in other words, in China, it's an industrial automation technology, and therefore increasingly all over the world, it's an industrial automation technology. If you go to a port in Africa, if you go to an automobile factory in Brazil, if you go to a logistics and fulfillment facility in Malaysia or Thailand, odds are that the next generation of industrial automation technology and automated management technology that they are installing is running on Huawei RAN, radio access networks, and is a private network that is specifically adapted to the complex of industrial components that together form that production facility. So for example, many of you would be familiar with Huawei's Harmony OS, which originally derived from Android, but at this point is said to have purged all Android code. I haven't done an audit myself, so I can't say. But Harmony OS is what you get on a Huawei phone. The thing is, you don't just get it on a phone anymore, because there's also Harmony OS for cars. There's also Mine Harmony OS for mines. What is Mine Harmony OS doing? Well, if you go into a mine, there are all sorts of specialized pieces of equipment, from drilling to conveyor belts, to processing, to smelting, to automated forklifts. All of these are made by different specialized industrial companies that have particular expertise and supply chains for each one of those industrial specialties. And each one of them is different. A drilling company is different from a conveyor belt manufacturing company. But what they all have in common is that they're not networking companies. So whatever proprietary 30-year-old software their factory equipment is running on, Huawei comes in and says, we'll build the middleware. We'll build the middleware so that it's all in one uniform interface. You can have a guy sitting at a desk, click, 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 and he's controlling all these different things and integrating them, right? And we'll install the network, we'll make sure that there's a spectrum allocation, we'll build the terminals and attach them to the devices. In essence, it's the easy button. It's the easy button for industrial applications. The pitch that's coming from the rest of the world is, look at all of these different amazing capabilities. We can give you a flip phone. We can give you a PDA. We can give you a Walkman. The Huawei proposition is, we'll put it all on one device. If you were the one responsible for making purchasing decisions, isn't that what you would want to go with? Especially if there is some nice state capital and patient capital waiting to help you along. Of course, we all know the price for this. But the appeal of a package like this is undeniable. So I realized this when I was looking at American 5G policy, and my next question is, where is the free market solution for this? Why isn't capitalism stepping up and delivering? And the short answer is that the radio network manufacturing companies in I can't say in the United States so much anymore, but let's say with Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, although Ericsson does manufacture a lot in the United States. But anyway, the Western radio manufacturing companies service their traditional customers of mobile network operators and have no critical path towards developing these middleware type technologies. And no wonder, because if your target is the American domestic market, then the sophisticated industrial operators in the United States, whether that's GM, whether that's Boeing, they already have their automation somewhat done, right? They already have their own proprietary packages that they're using. And in any case, going out and buying a new 5G private network might not be in their top 10 list of priorities at a time when they're having product problems, when they're having labor force problems. Meanwhile, all of China is getting on advanced manufacturing at the same time. 20 years ago, you would have been seeing people scooping chemicals out of a vat with a plastic scoop and pouring them into another vat. It was pretty lowbrow. It was what I would call maquiladora level industrialization, at least in a lot of sectors. It's not like that anymore. It is absolutely not. And again, who do you see sitting integrating this? Yes, there are some large Chinese conglomerates. Yes, there are some large Chinese specialized industrials. But much of this has evolved directly from individually owned factories or small groups of factories owned by small consortia of individual investors. After all, Deng's Southern Tour was just about 33 years ago, right? So Chinese capitalism is new. So when you see these factories, all of them making very pedestrian products in some cases. In one case that I studied, it was actual kitchen sinks. But making these very pedestrian things, you've got one individual investor who perhaps has 400, 800 employees that are all employed in this factory, and then in the next city you have another guy like that, and in the next city you have another guy like that. What's the common denominator between them? It's Huawei. Because once Huawei is looking at everyone who's manufacturing sinks, you've got it all coming in a uniform data format that you can start running machine learning on. That's amazing. We don't have anything like that here. And so the American proposition to other countries for far too long has been, stop buying all this damn Huawei. But on the other hand, it's so hard to resist. First of all, the price points are so good. They're incredible. I've seen cases where Huawei will come in and bid a job at something like a third of the cost for Nokia and Ericsson. Never mind an actual profitable deal, but they'll come in and bid it so far below cost that it's actually weird. The Chinese government simply supplies them with offsetting contracts domestically. Therefore, they're enabled to bid strategically any place they want. It's a great business if your job isn't to make money, but instead to increase the SIGINT and strategic industrial footprint of the People's Republic of China. In other words, when you have Western companies that are trying to make a profit and that have to compete in the capital markets against, for example, the American software sector, it's like having mall cops out to fight the Red Army. The disparity in force is so preposterous, and Huawei has such an unlimited capacity to underbid in furtherance of PRC strategic interests that there simply is no way for a Western company to compete. But going beyond that, there's going beyond this concept of state capital interventions to secure mobile network operator contracts, the much more interesting question to me is what this means for the future of industrialization. Because the problem is, the Chinese technology is not derivative. It's not, at this point, merely copying. It's not, at this point, merely playing catch-up. In some areas, it's superior. And as an integrated system versus disparate systems with no integrator, there's the ability to gain insights from the integration itself and to develop a new sector that didn't exist anyplace else and for which there is no present Western competition, period, full stop. And again, I find myself asking, if I'm a neutral third-party country that perhaps is well-disposed towards the United States and is perhaps even ill-disposed towards the People's Republic of China, but that nonetheless has also got domestic developmental imperatives, has got a domestic budget to manage, and is under constant pressure from the PRC. At some point, something's got to give. At some point, something's going to give. If the country won over from you has modernized its ports and you haven't, you're at a structural competitive disadvantage. How are you going to get your mining products out of the country? What if Huawei equipment is sniffing your commodities as they're being developed, manufactured, and exported, and then effectively you're being insider traded on your own commodities? Don't laugh. That's exactly what happened in the United States in the 1960s and 70s when the Department of Agriculture couldn't maintain the same quality of information as the international grain dealers, Cargill, Continental, whatnot, because the merchants of grain had information about the movement of grain, about instantaneous changes in pricing, etc. Ag was way behind, and they got the table ran on them. Well, it's worse now because we're not talking about Western companies like Cargill and Continental. We're talking about the People's Republic of China having access to that kind of SIGINT. And if you're a country where your neighbor has done this, and the United States has not shown up and helped you, and there is no Western tech suite to compete, you're facing this incredibly unattractive choice, this terrible choice, where either you go with what the West is asking you to do, and therefore you stymie your own development and exporting, or else eventually you knuckle under. Right now, Chinese telecommunications equipment, John has shown us some very alarming maps. I would say more generally that between 55 and 60% of current installations worldwide are Chinese, with obviously the lion's share of that being Huawei. Does anyone see any prospects of this trend reversing anytime soon? I think the basis for reversing this trend is to stop thinking about this as price competition to provide the cheapest equipment and the cheapest service to mobile network operators, whether in Southeast Asia, whether in Africa, whether in Europe, whether anywhere. And instead, the response from the United States government should be, what does it look like for us to deliver the capabilities that Huawei is advancing worldwide? The truth is, China does lots of peaceful trade. There are lots of fine products coming out of China. And we have to ask ourselves, what does it look like to not just say, no, 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 you're on the naughty spot? What does it look like instead to say, you should buy the Western suite simply because it's better? Let's be clear. China isn't 10 feet tall. China is a fantastically advanced country now. China is 1/4 of the human race, fine. But they're not invincible, they're not indestructible, they're not qualitatively different from the rest of us. What they are is thinking strategically, so to speak, playing chess while we play, checkers might be too much, while we play dominoes, while we play go fish, I don't know. But in any case, there's a coherent plan there. Those of you who are free marketeers, and I salute you, may be asking at this point, well, isn't all this Huawei giveaway, this subsidy, just pouring out consumer welfare on the rest of the world? If the Chinese government wants to give away cheap telecommunications equipment, why shouldn't we just take it? After all, that means that they're making their own population suffer in order to increase the standard of living of our population. For a long time, that was the definitive argument. I guess my answer there would be that if you look at Huawei as a strategic play rather than as a consumer welfare play, then the calculus flips. Because what we're seeing is, for example, patient capital to allow Huawei to develop these industrial suites, which will then become the standard, so to speak, the Windows plus Intel of industrial networking worldwide. And at that point, there simply is no alternative to the Chinese product. They've already done all the discovery. They've already paid the R&D costs. What's the incentive for someone else to break into that market? And if at that point, every one of those installations causes the United States to pay an invisible tax on commodities trading in SIGINT, as well as all of our friends and allies, of course, then this is a case where we let them steal a base. We let them steal a base under the umbrella of consumer welfare. I think the economics of this are going to be debated till the end of time, but it's probably true that Huawei has received subsidies about equivalent to what it would cost the United States to build at least 10 aircraft carriers. This is a major strategic investment by China. But I would have a hard time looking at what Huawei has done in the past 20 years and saying that China didn't get some value for money. So where do we go from here? Well, first of all, we need to clean up our own house. In the United States, there is still plenty of Huawei and ZTE equipment operating at this moment. There's plenty of white-labeled Chinese equipment operating at this moment. There is plenty of, there are plenty of things where the United States government, if it had its full druthers, would put manufacturers on the covered list, but it can't because they're too serious dependencies for other things. And that's a heck of a situation to be in. Imagine going back 50 years ago and saying, well, actually, we have to continue letting the USSR do whatever it wants in our domestic telecommunications, because otherwise small rural carriers would go under. Can you imagine? Heads would have rolled in droves. But that's the situation we are literally in right now. And it's not just carriers. It's utilities companies, for example. There are entire categories of utilities telecom where the market is 80% plus Chinese. It's our ports. Ship-to-shore cranes are about 80% Chinese in the United States. By the way, we found undisclosed cell phone modules in some of those. Are those kill switches? Are they phoning home? Who the heck knows? All we know is that they're there. That's not the only place we found them. We've also found them in solar farms. That's even scarier, because if it's in a photovoltaic inverter, then that is what converts the DC produced in the panel into the AC that goes into the grid. If you send it in out of phase, you might brown out Texas. So we are in this situation because we've been put in at a strategic disadvantage by our willingness to go to the lowest price. In other words, sometimes it's a good idea to go to the lowest price, and sometimes that just means that you're the product. That's our current situation today. My suggestion, as someone who has no official powers or responsibilities whatsoever, but is getting up and giving a speech anyway, my suggestion is that everyone should ask themselves, is my current problem downstream of Chinese telecommunications dominance? In a surprising number of cases, the answer will be yes. If your problem is cartels, Chinese telecommunications dominance is a factor. If your problem is navigation of the seas, same. If your problem is submarine cables, well, that's obviously explicitly telecommunications. My point is, almost everywhere you look, if your problem is manufacturing, if your problem is exporting, if your problem is domestic security and the physical safety of Americans, Chinese telecom is upstream of that. And what we should be doing, what the United States government should be doing, is not looking at this as an FCC or NTIA matter anymore. This should be a DHS matter. This should be a Department of War matter. This should be a State Department matter. And well, that's what I'm working on these days, so wish me luck. Thanks very much, folks.